I just don't care about this season at all. I know people will get mad at me for saying I wish I could have gone to Ryan and said, please let me sit this
Let
one
me
out.
out, yeah.
Yeah, let me out.
American Horror Story Roanoke was an unprecedented season in many ways. Due to a switch in cinematographers and a story-motivated change in format to mockumentary, the show experienced a drastic change in its visual style during this season, and it was also the first AHS season to cover familiar ground, as the broad theme of a haunted house was already covered all the way back in Murder House Season 1. Not only that, but the season is also infamous for its mystery box marketing campaign, in which the season's subtitle and its relation to the lost colony of Roanoke was more or less kept a secret until the premiere date. The resulting season furthers AHS's plunge into the meta after seasons like Freak Show and Hotel became more and more self-referential, but with the found footage and mockumentary focus of Roanoke, the season is meta in a different way, as it is putting the focus more on the production process of television, rather than letting the show become a revolving door of cameo characters from previous seasons, at least at first. As you might expect, I do have a lot to say about this season, and I don't want to waste too much time, so let's just begin with a brief recap of the season's production history and marketing campaign. For those of you who were not AHS fans since its beginning, I'd personally say that the AHS fandom and viewership peaked around the seasons of Freak Show and Hotel, so it was no surprise that AHS got renewed for season 6 almost an entire year before it would air, and even before the renewal was official, Ryan Murphy was already teasing that the next season would be, quote, more dark and more rogue than Hotel was. Fast forward to the summer of 2016, and American Horror Story Season 6's promotional campaign kicked off during 2016 San Diego Comic-Con, and as promised, they committed to teasing the season completely as a mystery box. On July 29th, 2016, FX released a handful of teasers with no clear through line, aside from this symbol, a number 6 that also forms a question mark. This symbol was echoed throughout the season's posters, which focus on many era-spanning horror tropes that I love, and they're honestly some of my favorite AHS posters. There may not be a clear aesthetic through line, but a lot of them do seem to be referencing very specific classic horror films like Nosferatu, The Creature from the Black Lagoon, The Mummy, Rosemary's Baby, or even The Children of the Corn. Some other posters even seem to be referencing found footage films like maybe even Cloverfield. So in the midst of the mystery though, a few teasers and posters do stand out as being genuine hints towards the true theme of the season. This colonially dressed woman with nails and jewelry made of human teeth goes hand in hand with the season's visuals and time period for the flashbacks. This poster was also fittingly chosen as Roanoke's key poster, and then this secluded farmhouse teaser and poster also serves as a good representation of the farmhouse featured throughout the season. There were also various teasers featuring cornhusk dolls and ghostly children that do clearly represent the cornhusk dolls and ghostly children that appear in the season. And as I mentioned moments ago, this very creepy teaser also does a great job at teasing the season's found footage influences. But all in all, the goal of Roanoke's marketing campaign was to misdirect, and if it weren't for some leaks in the production process, it would have been successful in my opinion. But like I mentioned, as much as the creators and marketing team wanted the theme of Roanoke to remain a mystery until the day that episode 1 aired, unfortunately TMZ had to go and ruin the fun for everyone and leak set photos to the public that gave us some very good clues towards the Roanoke theme. So for avid online fans, the mystery was solved by the time season 6 episode 1 aired on September 14th, 2016, which by the way was the earliest any season of AHS had aired at that time, as all previous seasons premiered in the month of October. I'll talk a little bit more about what exactly TMZ leaked later on in the video, but now let's dive straight into the format-bending premiere episode of AHS Roanoke.
Y'all ready to catch some ghosts?
American Horror Story Season 6, Episode 1, entitled Chapter 1, immediately immerses you into the show within the show, a paranormal reenactment docuseries by the name of My Roanoke Nightmare, which tells the sinister story of two of the season's main characters, Shelby and Matt Miller. My Roanoke Nightmare revolves around the reenactments of this couple's experiences, starting in Los Angeles and ending up in North Carolina. So right off the bat, the season is keying us into one of its quirkiest aspects. Almost every character in this season is played by two different actors, one being the genuine character, and then the other being an actor portraying them in the show. For instance, the real Shelby Miller, who we will primarily get to know from these confessional segments, is played by Lily Rabe, but in the reenactment scenes in the show, Shelby is played by Sarah Paulson. And within the context of the season, it is understood that Sarah Paulson's Shelby is merely an actor portraying Shelby for the sake of the docuseries. For real-life Matt, he's played by Andre Holland, who you may know from Moonlight, which just so happened to be released the exact same year as Roanoke. And for reenactment Matt, the role is played by Cuba Gooding Jr., who at the time had very recently found a bunch of success in AHS's sister show, American Crime Story, where he memorably portrayed O.J. Simpson. Alright, the episode begins with Matt and Shelby recounting the story of how they met, which was at a yoga class that Shelby teaches. After that, they move to Los Angeles together,
the yoga capital of the world.
And this is where they decide they'll start to try for a baby. And when Shelby quickly ends up pregnant, things seem like they can only get better. So they celebrate the good news with a night on the town, but it is this night that the couple unfortunately end up being targeted in what they describe as a gang initiation. This scene was filmed outside of the Orpheum Theater in downtown Los Angeles, and I've actually been there once, and as a fun fact, it's actually right down the street from the James Oviatt building, which is where they shot certain exterior scenes for the Hotel Cortez in season 5. The attack puts Matt in the hospital, which is also where Shelby discovers that she's had a miscarriage due to the stress. Once Matt gets out of the hospital, the couple decide that they need to start anew, so they head to North Carolina, which is where Matt grew up and he still has family nearby. One day, while frolicking in the woods, Shelby and Matt stumble upon a huge and striking farmhouse with a for sale sign plastered in the yard. Inside, the house is even more unique than it looks on the outside. It's truly one of my favorite set pieces of the show, and one that tends to get overlooked when compared to the much more extravagant set pieces like Briarcliff or the Hotel Cortez. Despite this season's primary location's size, it is rich in atmosphere and intention, and the set itself really does get utilized to its fullest potential throughout the season. The long arched hallways, the aged wallpaper, the plethora of windows, the spiral staircase, the beautiful spiral-shaped window on the second floor. It's details like these that really help to sell the atmosphere and the horror of this season, and it's one of the things that grounds the viewer in reality in this season that is by nature very much not grounded in reality. Matt and Shelby win the house at an auction for $40,000, which pisses off the only other bidders, the Polk family. We then cut to this season's title sequence. Let's all sit and watch it together. Oh, right. Roanoke is actually the only season of American Horror Story that does not have a title sequence. The title sequences are something that AHS had been doing since the beginning, so naturally fans had become attached to the idea of each season having its own uniquely stylized title sequence, so fans were pretty disappointed in this choice, but despite the outrage, a title sequence has never been made for this season to this day. I'm sure it had something to do with wanting fans to be immersed in the world of My Roanoke Nightmare, but if that were the case, why would they cut to the American Horror Story title card at all? If we're pretending to be fully immersed in this fake TV show, let's just go all the way and not even reference AHS in any way, shape, or form. But if we are going to acknowledge that we are watching AHS, then for goodness sakes, why not give us a title sequence? The choice still doesn't even make sense to me because of the decision to use the AHS title card. It breaks the immersion and still does not give us a title sequence. It seems like a lose-lose to me, but I'm not still bitter, I promise. The episode continues by showing us a bit of the couple's renovation process as they both are adjusting to their new normals. One night though, Matt and Shelby are startled by some eerie pig screeches in the night. Matt goes outside to investigate, and he finds the yard to be completely trashed, and he nearly gets hit by a projectile trash can. Immediately, they suspect the family who lost the house in the auction, the Polks. Another morning, Matt leaves to run some errands, and Shelby's breakfast is interrupted by a sudden hailstorm. At least, she thinks it's hail. But what is actually falling from the sky is human teeth. This short sequence is easily one of the episode's most memorable, and in my opinion, it's one of the show's strongest uses of sound design. When the storm starts, it sounds like hail, but there's something just not quite right about it. And then as it intensifies, the sound almost becomes unified and uniform, and it starts to calm into a rain-like sound, but still there's something clearly not right about the sound. But by the time we realize through the visuals that the hail is in fact teeth, the sound design transforms and the string-heavy score gets louder, and another sound effect is used in combination with the strings, and it starts to sound like Shelby and the audience are surrounded by a swarm of wasps. We know she's not engulfed by literal wasps, but this sound design paired with the unexplainable visuals creates such a strong feeling of anxiety and dread that I'd say is mostly communicated through those sound design choices. And it is a short but great scene that speaks to how much sound design and score can elevate the visuals of horror films and television. By the time Matt gets home, the teeth are all gone.
I know what I saw.
Later on, Matt leaves for a work trip, but before he leaves, he makes sure Shelby will be alright at the house.
I'm gonna be fine. I'm gonna be fine.
A shutter bangs on the kitchen window and startles Shelby, and we get a really good look at Sarah Paulson's colored contacts that she wears as Shelby in this season. Jesus Christ, put those things away. Then, while wandering the halls with a glass of wine, Shelby sees two ghost nurses. We will hear more about these particular nurses later, but this isn't the first time that AHS has had ghost nurses, as the trope traces all the way back to Murder House. Shelby searches the house and finds no nurses, so she takes her glass of wine outside to the scariest hot tub to ever hot tub. The last thing I would do if I just saw two ghost nurses in my house would be to go outside in the woods and close my eyes to any potential danger. Especially if outside is also where I know teeth fall from the sky and trash cans fly at your face. And what do you know, a hand soon grabs Shelby's face and attempts to drown her, and we get a brief look at Shelby's attacker through the distortion of the hot tub water. Shelby survived the attempted drowning, called the police and Matt, who soon enough both cast a whole lot of doubt on Shelby's version of events. After this incident, it's clear to Shelby that she does not want to live in this house. Another night comes, and Matt hears the pig squealing again, and he opens the front door to find a bloody pig corpse on his doorstep. Matt keeps this a secret from Shelby so as not to worry her even more, and he buries the pig in the woods. With another work trip on the horizon, Matt installs security cameras and invites his sister, Lee Harris, to stay at the house with Shelby while he's away. Lee Harris in the reenactments is played by the woman, the myth, the legend herself, Angela Bassett, and the real Lee Harris is played by Adina Porter in her second American Horror Story appearance, her first being a one-episode guest appearance back in season 1. Lee Harris may not technically be Adina's first AHS role, but it is one of the most expertly executed and impactful roles in the show, and it's no surprise why Adina continued to define the silver age of AHS. Lee is a former cop with a decent amount of animosity towards Shelby.
Yoga is not a job. I used to play volleyball in high school. Back then, yoga was called stretching, and it was something you did before, not as exercise.
Lee recounts her history with the police force, where she was on track to become a detective before getting shot on the job. The injuries she sustained in the shooting left her with an addiction to painkillers that quickly caused her life to spiral out of control. And one day, another officer discovered her pills in her patrol car, and she was promptly fired from the force. Things had also spiraled in her marriage at this point.
Divorce. Now, when I'm at rock bottom.
Lee's husband, Mason, told her that not only does he feel neglected, but so does their daughter, Flora, who Lee had forgotten to pick up from school 3 times in the last month. In the divorce, Mason was granted full custody of Flora, while Lee could only be with her 3 days every 2 weeks. Shelby chops some carrots, gets spooked, investigates, and then finds her carrots to be stolen and her slab of meat stabbed.
Smelling.
Jesus! Oh, Jesus, Lee!
My brother married one jumpy bitch.
Shelby drinks wine in front of Lee, and Lee expresses a boundary.
While I'm here, could you please not drink inside the house?
That night, after hearing pigs squealing in the night, a bottle of wine rolls into Lee's bedroom. Thinking Shelby was playing a sick joke, she confronts her, and the only thing that gets them to stop arguing is when they hear a noise in the house. Tracking this noise to the basement, the ladies discover a TV that has been turned on and is playing a tape. On the tape, we hear the voice of a man who is following the sounds of those all too familiar pig squeals that the Millers have been hearing in the night. The footage continues and delivers a jump scare straight out of the movie Signs. That's right, not only do we have colonial ghosts and vengeful rednecks to worry about, but we've also got a piggy man. The piggy man was an urban legend first referenced in Murder House, and in fact, a lot about this first chapter feels reminiscent of that first season. So to break that down just a little bit more, here's special guest Cain Varner with some of Roanoke's thematic connections to Murder House.
As you just heard, the Piggy Man is an American Horror Story urban legend that was first mentioned in the 6th episode of Murder House, where one of Ben Harmon's patients describes the urban legend as follows.
He was a hog butcher in Chicago during the World's Fair of 1893, and before he would go into the slaughter pen, he would put on this mask, this pig mask that he'd made from one of his other kills. Because not too long after, his former customers, they started turning up dead, gutted, skinned, and hung upside down in a bathtub to drain like a hog in his shop.
Later on in Roanoke, it would eventually be revealed that the very urban legend from season 1 was directly inspired by an ancestor of the Polk family, who himself was emulating this pigman spirit.
Kincaid Polk. He used to take the hogs to slaughter in Chicago. Then came the World's Fair. That's when the Piggy Man was born. After slaughtering hogs, he put on a pig mask and slaughtered people. He got the idea from the others. He saw what the butcher did.
Aside from the repeated instances of ghost nurses and piggy men, Roanoke is littered with a ton of subtle references to Murder House, each with a slight twist put on them. For example, in the first episode of Murder House, the Harmons move from the East Coast to Los Angeles, and in Roanoke they reverse the roles by having the Miller family move from Los Angeles to the East Coast. In both cases, these cross-country moves are in part motivated by miscarriages. Both seasons also feature a family encountering not only ghosts, but some pretty intrusive neighbors within each of their premieres, which is also something to note. And finally, perhaps the most blatant connection between the seasons is the fact that it was in the Murder House where the Roanoke tale was first told. However, the show's 2 versions of the Lost Colony have some pretty big differences. In season 1, episode 11, Billy Dean Howard tells Violet about an alternate history where the Lost Colony didn't mysteriously vanish, but they all met certain death.
The entire colony of Roanoke, all 117 men, women, and children, died inexplicably.
This scene is conveniently vague about the final resting place of the colonists, but Billy Dean goes on to say that the local Native American tribes then cursed the ghosts to banishment by uttering the word Croatoan.
The elder completed the curse that would banish the ghosts forever. How? By uttering a single word. The same word found carved on a post at the abandoned colony. Croatoan!
Not only is this version of events contradictory to history, it is also contradictory to the version of events that we learn about in Roanoke. According to Billy Dean, not long after the ghost colony hauntings began, the colonists were successfully banished by the Native American tribes. In Roanoke, though, there is no mention of this banishment, nor of the colonists' murder of multiple Native American tribes during the 16th century. In fact, the way it's presented to us in Roanoke Roanoke, the first murder committed by the ghost colonists, aside from murdering their own, was 2 whole centuries later in the late 1700s.
Thank you, Cain, for breaking all of that down for us, but to build upon that just a little bit, the similarities between seasons 1 and 6 are undeniable. Right off the bat, Roanoke is of course the first season since Murder House to focus on a haunted house, and I think a big reason why Roanoke is so experimental in its format and execution was an attempt to differentiate the 2 haunted house seasons. Of course, this stylistic change also coincides with the departure of longtime AHS cinematographer Michael Goy, and also the full stop on the show's use of film cameras. Not using film cameras makes sense in the context of this season being a modern-day mockumentary, but the fact that AHS did not ever resume the utilization of film cameras ever again after this point definitely contributed to a regression in the show's visual aesthetic. But while Michael Goy may not be cinematographer on this season, he does direct an episode, so Michael Goy fans, look out for Chapter 2. While we're talking cinematography, the cinematography for Roanoke was instead helmed by Nelson Cragg in episodes 1 through 3, Jesse M. Feldman in episodes 4 and 5, and then Gavin Kelly headed the cinematography in episodes 6 through 10. And at least in my opinion, the team pulls off a lot of great visuals throughout the season. Even with the limitations of the TV show genres that the show is parodying in this season, Roanoke does achieve a lot of great visuals. I do think people are a little hard on the season's visuals, largely because it is the first season without Michael Goy, and fans of course grow an attachment to the people that work on the show for a long time, and also Michael Goy's visual style undoubtedly contributed to the visual DNA of AHS. But to me it's a similar situation of how people were really hard on Hotel just because it was the first without Jessica Lange. Roanoke also comes right off of the heels of Hotel, which was the show's most visually extravagant, so I definitely understand why the visuals were something that fans immediately latched onto when it comes to criticizing the season, but I'm gonna stand my ground and say that's not entirely fair. Let's all combine our forces and attack the real common enemy when it comes to cinematography, and that is AHS Apocalypse. Matt races home knowing he would beat the police as Shelby and Lee end up trapped in the basement while the pitchfork-holding mob do God knows what upstairs. Enough time passes and the ladies go back upstairs to investigate, where they find the spiral staircase has been elaborately strung up with a bunch of ominous dolls made out of sticks and corn husks. Once Matt arrives, they show him the Piggy Man video, which I forgot to mention features another familiar face from season 1, aside from the Piggy Man, as the man holding the camera is played by Dennis O'Hare in his 5th AHS appearance, but more on his character later. Shelby finally tells Matt that she wants to leave the house, but both Matt and Lee say that they can't let these people win. Shelby then ups and leaves, and when Matt calls her, she answers the call by hitting the decline button, which makes a whooshing sound as if she sent a text message.
Hello?
She is distracted long enough to be jump scared by a woman in the road who she plows directly into. The woman holds a butcher's cleaver, and in the reenactment footage, she is played by Kathy Bates in a role that we will soon come to know as the Butcher. Shelby gets out of the car and tries to help the Butcher, but she is lured into the woods, she gets lost, and she eventually comes across another shrine made out of those dolls. She begins to feel and see the ground move around her in a really cool visual that I honestly forgot about after all of these years. This effect definitely should have been built upon in some way in the season. Shelby is soon surrounded by those torch-holding guys who, I'm just gonna come right out and say it, are the ghosts of the lost colony of Roanoke. One of them, as you see, is played by Wes Bentley from Hotel, who, despite very minimal appearances in the season, is credited as a main cast member. And with that, Chapter 1 of Roanoke concludes, and the credits roll with this season's rendition of the theme song, which to me just sounds like a slightly different mix of the Hotel theme song, but it is different enough, so I suppose I'll accept it as a new rendition. The mockumentary elements of Roanoke are largely incorporated into the season through parodies or homages to other TV shows, and to help me break those homages down throughout this video, I've once again enlisted the help of AHS historian and friend of the channel, EJ Moreno.
Hello to my American Horror Story historians. That is so weird not saying that on my channel. Yep, my name is EJ Moreno. I do American Horror Story reviews. I was in a previous Skyler video, which I absolutely love. I've just been obsessed with the Scream Queen video Skyler did. Not to give you a little shout out, but yes, you brought me on to tell your audience all about the TV shows within American Horror Story Roanoke. I'm not going to give you my take on this season. That's not what this is about, but I really love the homage to television that is in this season. We get a lot of mini shows within a show. It was almost unheard of for TV, for American Horror Story. It feels inventive and fresh then, and it feels just as fresh and weird and interesting now. I'm really impressed with it. So I want to talk to you all about each individual show, giving you a little glimpse of what the magic that was created homaging television. The first story we are talking about is My Roanoke Nightmare. Our first show is the docuseries, a documentary style filmmaking that has the entire thing structured as a extremely high budget reenactment of true events. We meet Matt and Shelby and the actors living out their story. The whole format of My Roanoke Nightmare is very familiar to any popular docuseries. I'm not calling it Tiger King, but you know what these are. They pop up on streaming services like 3 a week. There's a million of them on cable TV. There's also some movies that bring me back to My Roanoke Nightmare. We have movies like Lake Mongo, The Taking of Deborah Logan, and Creep. Also, Demon House is a great documentary that feels so inspired by this show.
I remember the series premiere of Roanoke disappointing me at the time, but I think it was mostly me being unsatisfied due to the hype that the mystery box marketing campaign built up for me personally, and that just goes to show how risky it is to do that, because it allows fans to theorize their wildest fantasies, and then what the showrunners were actually planning all along once that comes to fruition. And in Roanoke's case, it was a much more pared down and slow story than I expected, not to mention how wildly different the season is from AHS of the past. Expectations were not fully met with just that first episode. But nowadays, with so much retrospect, I do think this episode is pretty dang solid. The teeth hail scene, the Piggy Man appearances, the atmosphere, the exploration of this beautiful farmhouse set, and its set design, of course, and also the subtle introduction of a very important character and one of my favorite AHS characters of all time, Lee Harris. Angela Bassett steals the show in her scenes for me, but Sarah Paulson's Shelby is also just very enticing to me. She wears these bright blue contacts and this very voluminous TV wig. She immediately comes across as a very artificial character, which I think is intentional because, of course, remember, this is in-universe an actor playing Shelby, and the real Shelby is Lily Rabe. It's just a lot of fascinating aesthetic choices and performance choices when it comes to Shelby. I can never truly look away from her when she's on screen. All in all, the episode sets up a lot of our main characters and conflicts for the season, while still leaving a lot of surprises in store for the rest of the season. It may be an underwhelming premiere episode in comparison to the wide scopes and high stakes of premieres like Hotels, Freak Shows, or Covens, but as you'll see, despite several multi-season parallels, Roanoke is not trying to follow the blueprints that were put in place by seasons past, at least not in the ways that you would expect. Chapter 2 is written by Tim Minear and is directed by Michael Goy, who we've talked about at length on this channel, but as I mentioned earlier in the video, he was AHS's primary cinematographer for its first 5 seasons, with the exception of a handful of Murder House episodes. Aside from being director of photography, Michael Goy also directed a handful of AHS episodes as well, and this episode is Michael Goy's 4th and final directorial credit on the show, and the plot picks up where the last episode left off, continuing to show us one more important member of the Roanoke colony, a witch named Skahawk, who is played by Lady Gaga in her 2nd and final AHS role. There's quite the debate on the pronunciation of this name, but Skahawk is the one I'm sticking with for this video. While Shelby aimlessly wanders the woods, the butcher punishes a colonist who had run off with some of their supplies. In a grotesque ritual, the traitor gets a pigtail pinned to his ass and a pig's head forced over his own, before the butcher roasts him over a fire with the help of her right-hand witch, Skahawk. And this is the origin of this season's Piggy Man, one of the many ghosts scorned by the butcher who, by killing them, she has forced to haunt her land. Shelby comes across this ritual and watches before the butcher notices her. Shelby runs back into the woods, but she quickly finds herself back on the road where she is nearly hit by her own car. Disoriented, Shelby faints. In the hospital, Matt promises Shelby that they'll move out of the house as soon as possible, but Shelby now refuses. She is now fully on board with Matt's theory that the Polk family is pulling off an elaborate hoax in order to scare the Millers away from the house.
We can't let them. We can't leave.
Mason brings Flora to the farmhouse for Lee's weekend with her, and Lee is determined to win back her trust. After she wanders off in the house, though, Lee finds Flora talking into the darkness of the basement.
Who are you talking to?
Priscilla.
Lee asks Flora about her new imaginary friend Priscilla, and Flora tells her
She's gonna make a bonnet for me just like hers if we help her.
Help her do what?
Make it stop.
Right then, the wind knocks over a flower pot in the next room, and in the debris, Lee finds a colonial-era bonnet. After another night of pig squealing, Shelby's had enough. Shelby gets lost in the woods again, clearly put in some sort of trance or spell, and Matt too gets lost looking for Shelby. Shelby desperately cries out for her husband with a call that will soon be ingrained in your head for eternity. Eventually, Shelby and Matt come upon another pig-involved ritual, which Matt promptly destroys. When the cops arrive, the evidence prevails, and they give the Millers the protection of one cop car stationed outside of their house 24/7. This next part's pretty dark, so be warned, but Matt is later haunted in the night by those ghost nurses, who we will soon learn worked here back in the 80s when this house was a nursing home for the elderly, and they sadistically murdered each of their patients who were hand-selected with names that spell out the word murder.
Is for Margaret.
The nurses in this season are a direct reference to a true story about very similar nurses who at one point sought to only choose victims that spelled out the word murder, but in reality they abandoned that plan as it proved to be pretty difficult. Once Lee's 3 days with Flora are up, Mason arrives to pick Flora up, but she is nowhere to be found. Thinking this is one of Flora's improvised games of hide-and-seek, they search the house and they find Flora in a cupboard where she is engaged in a trade deal with Priscilla, where Flora says she would give Priscilla her doll in exchange for Priscilla not killing them all.
They're going to kill us all.
Mason rushes Flora out of the house and promises to never let her come back. Because of the threat of potentially never seeing Flora again, Lee falls off of the wagon, which comes to light after she knocks over a bowl in the kitchen. Also noticing all of the knives currently lodged into the ceiling, Shelby accuses Lee of drunkenly doing that too.
I didn't do that.
Shelby and Matt later see the apparition of Priscilla, and when they go out to try and investigate, they don't find any ghost girls, but they do find a creepy cellar they previously did not know about. Meanwhile, a still drunk Lee briefly sees the nurses watching over her bed before they disappear. And in the hallway, she sees the unpleasant imagery of live pigtails nailed to the wall, which too disappear before the Piggy Man just about stops her heart through the reflection of a mirror. Because of the mockumentary angle of the season, not every horror sequence gets the room to breathe I think it deserves, and this is definitely one of them. It's a pretty well executed jump scare that is brought home by the FX work done on the pigtails, the Piggy Man, and of course by Angela Bassett's performance, but I think they could have extended this scene in particular to really maximize that tension and take it from unnerving to truly scary. As is though, I'd give this scene a small critique of being over-edited. In the cellar, Shelby and Matt discover a video camera. On the camera are more tapes left by Dennis O'Hare's character, who we now learn is named Dr. Elias Cunningham. Elias tells the camera his personal ghost story about the spirits in the house who at first haunted his dreams with terrible terrors before the spirits began to harm him physically as well. And this is what led Elias to start living in the cellar.
I am not crazy. I am an academic. I am an author.
Elias then goes on to explain what brought him to the house in the first place, and it turns out he was doing academic research on the very nurses who have been haunting the Millers. Elias then tells them through the tapes the nurse's backstory. One thing I didn't tell you about these nurses, though, is that their final mission of spelling their favorite word on the wall using the first letter of their victims' names remained unfinished, with the singular letter remaining being R. Elias believes that the nurses were killed by other spirits that don't necessarily live inside the house, but instead live in the surrounding woods. Matt realizes Elias's story matches up with the apparitions he saw, so he peels back the wallpaper in the dining room to reveal the nurse's long-lost graffiti. Back on the tape, Elias goes back into the house, and the footage gets very Cloverfield-esque thanks to the tint of the night vision. Elias is jump-scared by the butcher, and right at that moment, a bloody butcher's cleaver gets thrown into the miller's front door. If you watch my last deep dive, which was on the second season of Scream Queens, you'll know that the AHS ghost nurse trope was subtly referenced in that season's first episode.
Oh my god, ghosts.
They're not ghosts, idiot. They're nurses.
The two seasons were in production at the same time, in the same city, and were worked on by a lot of the same people, on the same lot. Chapter 1 of Roanoke, for instance, which features these ghost nurses, was written by AHS co-creators Ryan Murphy and Brad Falchuk, who also co-created and co-wrote the premiere episode of Scream Queens 2, which featured that ghost nurse line. And to connect the dots even further, these two particular episodes of television aired only 6 days apart back in September of 2016. This might be a reach here, but I believe that this Shelby line could be Roanoke's subtle response.
We'll never get back what we paid for this.
Those swamp people would buy it tomorrow if we gave them a holler.
For context, Scream Queens 2 centers around a hospital located on a swamp, and its main killer dresses up as a swamp monster. But anyways, to everyone's surprise, Lee shows back up with Flora, which Matt instantly knows is going to cause a lot of trouble for everyone involved. Mason calls Shelby, and she convinces him not to involve the police, and she and Matt bring Lee to her senses. Priscilla invites Flora to play outside, and this is going to be the last we see of Flora for a little bit. The rest of the episode consists of the gang frantically searching for Flora until they find just her yellow jacket at the top of the tallest tree in the woods. Chapter 2 is a little less engaging as Chapter 1 for me, but it still divulges a lot of necessary lore of the Roanoke farmhouse, which I do appreciate, but I will say later episodes do communicate other pieces of the house's lore in ways that feel a lot less like exposition dumps. The episode mostly sheds light on the nurse ghosts, and it also begins to introduce the ghost of Priscilla, but in the next two episodes, like I said, that's where we really get into the interesting pieces of the Roanoke history surrounding this house. So I guess my main critique of this episode is that it didn't get to the meat of the house's history quick enough, but that's just me being nitpicky, as again, the lore about Priscilla and the nurses is entertaining and necessary to the season, but the episode does put the colonists on the back burner in favor of focusing on those ghosts that I talked about and Lee's personal life, as well as Dr. Elias Cunningham's videotapes, and despite feeling a little exposition dumpy, the episode does continue to deliver on the season's darkness and its horror, despite its extremely meta format. Even if some of the horror moments are over-edited, the episode has a ton of terrifying visuals that have stood the test of time. Chapter 3 is written by James Wong and directed by Jennifer Lynch, and believe it or not, this is the first episode of American Horror Story to be directed by a woman. I had to quadruple check this because I myself did not believe it took that long, but indeed, it took 6 seasons and 66 episodes before AHS invited a woman to direct an episode. The season doesn't stop there, as actually 6 out of the 10 episodes of Roanoke are directed by women, but chronologically speaking, Jennifer Lynch was the first female director the show has ever had. This 60-40 gender split in the director's chair for Roanoke seems to be a soft launch of Ryan Murphy's HALF initiative, which aimed to create equal opportunities for women and minorities in the industry. And by the way, as you might have guessed with that last name and American Horror Story's history of nepotism, Jennifer Lynch is the daughter of one of the most influential filmmakers of our lifetime, David Lynch. But anyways, Chapter 3 continues with the search for Flora, but they end up finding another pig shrine instead, but this time the shrine is using the torso of Flora's doll that she was using to bargain with Priscilla. They then come across some feral children on the Polk's property. When taken into custody, the children only speak one word, Croatoan.
That was all they said.
Mason accuses Lee of knowing Flora's whereabouts and doing this all as a hoax, and Mason threatens to take his hunch to the authorities. And as Lee begs for him not to do that, Mason forcefully pushes her to the ground before storming out of the house. That night, authorities discover a body in the woods, and the next morning, Matt and Shelby look over the security footage from the previous night and discover that Lee left the house for a long enough period of time to perhaps kill Mason so that he wouldn't convince the cops that she's secretly hiding Flora. But that's just a theory. A theory that Lee overhears, sparking a light argument that is quickly interrupted by the arrival of a brand new character. Cricket Marlowe, a medium who is here to help them locate Flora at a small price. Cricket is played by the late Leslie Jordan in his second AHS role and his first since Coven.
Sorry, I always assume that my reputation arrives before I do.
Convinced by his digital footprint, Lee and the Millers entertain the medium as he inspects the premises. Cricket manages to pick out Flora's hiding spot in the cupboard, where now there's just that old bonnet. Cricket tells them that Flora is with Priscilla, a child who died in the late 16th century. Shelby permits Cricket to conduct a seance to hopefully speak with Priscilla, but they end up contacting the butcher instead, who tells them that she intends to harm anyone who invades her land, and lets them know that Priscilla is hiding Flora. But once the butcher gets her hands on Flora, she's toast. Cricket ends up enraging the butcher, and she shatters the windows before Cricket wards her off with the same words that the feral children were uttering. Cricket says that he can take them to Priscilla and Flora for the small price of $25,000. Lee pulls her gun on Cricket, but he warns that they'll come running back to him. On his way out, Cricket whispers to Lee, "Emily says hello," and she wonders why you quit looking for her all those years ago. It turns out that Flora's not Lee's only kid, and when she was only 17, she had a daughter named Emily who disappeared from a grocery store parking lot when she was 4 years old. This is another very familiar instance of American Horror Story's missing child trope, which at the time fans had just gotten a ton of in Hotel, but I digress. Because of Cricket's tip about Emily, Lee seeks him out the next day and gives him the money that he asks for. Cricket tells Lee some of the butcher's history. Her name is actually Thomason White. She was the wife of John White, the governor of the Roanoke colony. John White historically left the colony to go back to England for supplies, but upon his return, he found no trace of the colony. So basically, the show is building a fictional version of events based on some loose facts from the tale of the lost colony of Roanoke.
Everybody who lives in North Carolina knows the history of the lost colony.
Lee pushes back on Cricket's historical context to their ghost stories, claiming that the farmhouse is nowhere near the Roanoke colony, but Cricket says that she just doesn't know the whole story. According to Cricket, while John White was away, he left Thomason in charge, but a colonist named Anthony Cage trapped her in her sleep in protest of her being an unelected ruler, before the whole colony left her for dead in the woods. But the butcher didn't die.
I had crystallized. Oh.
She was saved by Skahawk, who fed her a pig's heart.
Surrender thy soul to me.
The butcher then returned to the colonist who betrayed her, and she slayed Anthony Cage before taking back control of the rest of the colony and demanding that they move inland. This is why the butcher and the lost Roanoke colonists haunt the woods near the Miller's farmhouse, as within the show's canon, this was the final resting place of the Roanoke colony, where the butcher staked her claim. Later, Cricket bargains with the butcher in the woods in an attempt to save Flora. Lee promises that they'll ensure no one will ever trespass on the butcher's land again, and they'll even burn down the farmhouse. But for some reason, Shelby fights this. And as this happens, Matt slips away where he is entranced by Skahawk, and Shelby ends up finding her husband and the ancient witch,
Screwing her up against this tree.
Then Lee is taken into custody as Shelby has turned her into the authorities under the suspicion that Lee might have killed Mason based on their security footage. Chapter 3 is filled with more conflicts, more history, and more drama, and it's an episode I honestly love. Starting with Skahawk and the concept of the ancient witch, I think it's a really strong element in this season, but since she is the only witch character in this season, the scope of the witchcraft is very honed in on this one particular character, and it doesn't say too much about any other witches outside of her, but I am satisfied with her backstory, as well as I am with Lady Gaga's portrayal of her, even if we all know that it was a little bit of a struggle behind the scenes.
The soldiers blamed me for the tumultuous journey. For the tumultuous journey.
I'm doing my record. I have things to do. I haven't slept. This is not the only job that I'm doing. I'm trying to do a good job. When they come and they tell me, it's the dialect and fucking tell me beforehand. So the kids will, I don't mind changing on the fly, but with something that's complicated when they keep throwing shit at you, it's like, I just don't want to sound German. You know what I mean?
Leslie Jordan as Cricket is also great, and he brings levity to this dark season. And while his performance and his seance is over the top and dramatic, both of those things are completely reined in and grounded by the very real desperation that you feel from Angela Bassett's Lee Harris in this episode. Kathy Bates also finally gets to shine in this episode, and her performance as the reenacted Butcher is definitely one of Roanoke's most iconic, hands down. Overall, Chapter 3 is a solid episode that significantly raises the stakes and builds the world, all while continuing the momentum of this season's supernatural mystery. Chapter 4 begins with Shelby melting down following the events of the previous episode, while Matt still can't remember a damn thing. Matt then melts down, which leads Shelby to believe him when he professes that he was not cognizant at the time of his affair in the woods. Later, Shelby is jump scared by a pigman, and instead of just disappearing like he did in the previous episode, the pigman instead chases Shelby downstairs, where he is eventually stabbed in the back by none other than Dr. Elias Cunningham, the guy from the found footage. When the pigman survives the stabbing, Elias shouts Croatoan, which does the trick. Elias explains the origin of the word Croatoan, which was historically left carved in a tree at the original site where the Roanoke colony disappeared from, which is true, but this next part is not true in the slightest.
It is actually a word of dark power and blood magic.
So, as I touched on before, the abridged legend of the lost colony of Roanoke is that the governor, John White, left to England for supplies, and when he returned to the site where he left the Roanoke colonists, there was no trace of them aside from that word, Croatoan, etched into a tree. The thing is, this etching was actually something that John White instructed his colonists to do if they were to relocate their settlement before he returned, and Croatoan most likely referred to either a nearby tribe of Native Americans, also known as the Croatoan, or the island off the coast of North Carolina, which was also called Croatoan at the time. As this essay that was posted during the airing of Roanoke expands on, Roanoke entirely erases the Croatoan Native American tribe, as well as the likely possibility that the Roanoke colonists could have assimilated with that very tribe, and they were never truly lost at all. I am no expert on the history of Roanoke, believe me, but as with a lot of quote-unquote unsolved mysteries, the simplest answer is sometimes the truth. And while feeding into wild theories can definitely be thrilling, it's also important that we're not, taking the name of a Native American tribe and claiming it's a word with dark powers and black magic, because that, my friends, is just racist. On top of that, there are no Native American characters in this season, and aside from Billy Dean Howard's Roanoke tale from season 1, Native Americans never truly get much of a presence in any of the 12 seasons of American Horror Story. Seasons like Coven or NYC don't shy away from sensitive topics in American history like slavery or the AIDS epidemic, so it definitely is a huge missed opportunity to me that the show hasn't really tackled the original American Horror Story, imperialism. Series co-creator Brad Falchuk actually spoke a little bit more about their decision to tackle Roanoke for season 6, and I think his explanation is pretty illuminating as to why they chose to ignore certain historical aspects of the Lost Colony tale.
Even before the show is something Ryan and I were always sort of fascinated by. It's sort of one of these great American legends about what happened to the people there, and it's one of the few sort of American mysteries. Yeah. And so it's always sort of in the back of our head. And then really what the season, in terms of the real big theme of the season, was more about the format. And so we found something like, well, if the format's sort of the star of the show, the Roanoke thing could be something fun we can explore, and because literally no one knows hardly anything, we can make everything up.
But as Elias explains the incorrect and racist history of the word Croatoan, the mockumentary cuts to reenactments of the Roanoke colony, as it has done on a few occasions at this point. This shot, though, I want to pause on because it was the creation of this shot that led to the secretive theme of the season to be leaked. Well, actually the blame falls entirely on TMZ, the ultimate scum of journalism, who obtained photos of the set for the Roanoke reenactment scenes, and while most of them aren't too revealing aside from the colonial time period, one photo of course features this exact tree with the word Croatoan etched into it. Because the word Croatoan is so linked to the story of the lost colony of Roanoke, when these photos dropped, AHS fans were all but certain that they had cracked the code on the season's mystery box marketing campaign, which had only just begun. And they had. These photos all but reveal the Roanoke connection, which of course is the subtitle of the season, but despite this, of course, AHS fans still had tons of surprises in store for season 6 throughout the duration of the season. Elias takes the Millers down to the basement where he uncovers documents that belong to the Chen family, a family of Taiwanese immigrants who lived in the farmhouse during the 70s. Flashback reenactments shed light on the hauntings that the Chen family endured during their time living here, which included the pigman violently pushing one of their daughters down the stairs. One night during a blood moon, they were visited by the butcher and her followers, who then executed the entire Chen family. Elias also says that the ghost nurses told him themselves that they too were brutally executed by the butcher for the offense of invading what she sees as her land. Oh, and there was one more resident of the house that is so boring that even Elias just briefly glosses over it.
1952, 3 hunters staying in the house. Something made them turn their rifles on each other and blow their heads off.
Anyways, he goes on to say that the disappearances or deaths of all of the house's previous residents all coincide with the cycle of the blood moon, which lasts 6 days, and Elias theorizes that this is the only period in which the spirits have the ability to kill the living. And those are pretty much the rules of the game for the Roanoke ghosts, and I think the whole blood moon element is what really brings this season home, with both a strong visual and also with a strong setup for the soon-to-be heightened stakes that the second half of the season capitalize on to great effect. After learning more about Flora's disappearance, Elias takes the Millers to Priscilla's hiding spot, located on the outskirts of the property where she and all of the other spirits scorned by the butcher take refuge. On the way there, though, they come across Skahak, and Shelby growls at her before chasing her into the woods. Shelby then gets lost in the woods yet again, where she comes across the spirits of the hunters that Elias was just telling us about. She gives shouting Croatoan a shot, but Elias shows up and informs her that the magic word will not work during the blood moon cycle, which has unfortunately just begun. They then find the rest of the misfit ghosts, and with them is Flora. These misfit ghosts, by the way, in entirety are Priscilla, the nurses, the Chen family, the pigman, and the 3 hunters. While Elias negotiates with Priscilla, a horn sounds and he is soon filled with arrows shot by lurking colonists. Without Flora or Elias, the Millers retreat back to the farmhouse, where they are immediately met by Cricket, the medium.
You ready to do things my way now?
Cricket then goes into the woods to gather more information, and when he gets back, he tells the story about how he met Skahak, who he calls
the bitch with the real power.
Skahak temporarily blinded Cricket, but it was then that he saw her truth. He saw that she's the most powerful of the colonists, and she's the one pulling their strings, not the butcher. Her power only grows with each passing of the blood moon, but as it grows, so do her sexual needs. Just to bring some extra context to the character, at the time, Ryan Murphy also went on the record to say that Skahak was the first ever Supreme, which of course in American Horror Story Coven is the witch that can master the 7 wonders, among having other attributes as well. To me, this kind of feels a little bit like J.K. Rowling retroactively saying Dumbledore's gay and everyone shits on the floor at Hogwarts, especially when Ryan also said in that very interview that the character of Skahak would be further explored in the continuation season of Coven. Apocalypse aired 2 years later, and there's no mention of Skahak, which is a huge missed opportunity in my opinion. If this was really the first ever Supreme, why would you not write that into the show or indicate that in some way? And speaking of Skahak, I now want to throw it over to another very special guest to the video, Mary Girl Moody, to talk all about Skahak and the history of the ancient witches, or as she calls her, Sexy Scathach. Roanoke itself is pretty cowardice, as it never commits to pronouncing her name on the show, so all of us fans are left to decide whether we're gonna go Gaelic with the pronunciation or not. So without further ado, here is Mary Girl Moody.
Hello everyone, it's Mary Girl Moody, and I have to say, Skylar, thank you so much for having me on your channel. I am a avid watcher and subscriber. Thank you for having me. Guys, I really love Roanoke, especially due to the fact that we have our OG Supreme, Sexy Scathach, come in this season. A lot of you are asking, Mary, why do you call her Sexy Scathach? That's not her name. Well, it is to me. All right, a woman who lives out in the woods, dirty, doesn't shave, doesn't brush her hair, brush her teeth, or anything like that, even put on deodorant, that's a sexy woman. And of course, I understand why Matt could not resist her. How could any man resist that? She is obviously Sexy Scathach. What I want to talk about in this video is the legacy of Scathach, the original Supreme and her influence on American Horror Stories, witches, and voodoo magic. Scathach uses blood sacrifices to gain and grant power. Voodoo, especially practiced by Marie Laveau, also relies on sacrifices to summon spirits and gain spiritual abilities. And both Scathach and Papa Legba, now don't come for me in the comments, guys, because I know for a fact that's how you say his name.
You're Papa Legba.
Papa Legba. See? Now, they both demand offerings in exchange for power. Now, Scathach existed long before the Salem witches and their structured coven. And unlike the Supremes in coven, their power passes through lineage, and the Scathach's power is raw and it's unrestricted. And the Salem witches may have structured their magic to control something that was once chaotic and primal, like Scathach's magic. And the concept of a Supreme, as seen in Coven and Apocalypse, might have originated from Scathach's role as the first and most powerful witch. Now, there are parallels definitely between Scathach and Papa Legba. Papa Legba grants Marie Laveau immortality in exchange for souls. And Scathach requires complete devotion and sacrifice for those who serve her. And both figures operate through supernatural deals. In Roanoke, Scathach selects men to mate with to continue her bloodline. And this is different from the Salem witches in Coven. They reproduce without any kind of supernatural intervention whatsoever. And her approach to continuing magical bloodlines could explain why some of the witches are born with strong, abilities, while others need training. Now, this also raises the possibility that Scathach's descendants, knowing or unknowingly, carry the magical potential into their future generations. And this would influence both the Salem witches and the voodoo practitioner. In Coven and Apocalypse, the Supreme is the most powerful witch of a generation. Scathach, as the first Supreme, was never challenged and never passed on her title to anyone. Now, this suggests that later witches like Fiona and Cordelia only inherited small fragments of what Scathach was actually capable of. Now, the witches in Coven and the voodoo practitioners seem like two separate groups, but they both share common core similarities with Scathach's magic. Now, whether through bloodlines, supernatural deals, or the concept of a Supreme, her influence as the OG Supreme is absolutely undeniable. And I love Sexy Scathach. She is one of my absolute favorite characters that has been created through American Horror Story. If you guys would like to see any theory videos that I will make, just come to my channel, Mary Girl Moody. Don't forget to like and subscribe because Skylar is the best. He's the king of American Horror Story. Bye, guys.
With Scathach's immense power, she takes cricket back in time to the Lost Colony's final resting place in the 16th century, where the land was rich in crops, but this wealth came at the price of the butcher's cruelty. Scathach specifically took cricket to the day that the butcher murdered Priscilla. The butcher's son, Amros, protested his mother's darkness in the name of Christianity and accused Scathach of poisoning Thomason's mind with witchcraft. When all of the colonists follow Amros out the door, we see Scathach's true powers at play as she manipulates Thomason to massacre them all in order to
release the power
of the blood moon.
So Thomasin does as she says, and she poisons the colonists under the guise of an apology feast. As they all die, Thomasin professes that they will all be bound to defend this land for eternity, and once they're all dead, Thomasin kneels before Skahak, who kills her so that she too can eternally walk these grounds. Cricket says that he believes he can end the Butcher's reign over this land with a simple spell, and he's gonna give it a shot tonight. Good luck with that.
Oh, that's my Uber.
Cricket's Uber stops abruptly when Flora runs into the road, and when Cricket follows her into the woods, they both vanish. The Millers fall asleep downstairs waiting for Cricket's return, but Matt eventually wakes up and gets lured down to the cellar, where Skahak is waiting for him. Shelby wakes up and gives us some more Matts.
Matt? Matt?
And during this experience, he psychically downloaded her entire backstory. Matt tells us Skahak was an English girl who was a stowaway on a British ship to America. She was imprisoned and sentenced to be burnt at the stake by British soldiers upon discovery. Skahak escaped capture though and murdered all of the soldiers and then made a new life for herself. Matt believes Skahak showed him all of this in order to convince him to join her.
And I would have.
But they are interrupted by Shelby, who is screaming about the arrival of the colonists who have captured Flora. Against all odds, Matt rescues Flora from the grasps of the Butcher and takes her inside. But it is from inside that they all witness the brutal sacrifice of none other than Cricket Marlowe. And when I say brutal, I mean brutal.
I heard about disemboweling, but to see it?
And that is how Chapter 4 concludes. Rest in peace, Cricket. Chapter 4 gives us more of Skahak, and I'm definitely not complaining. She is definitely my favorite part of this particular rewatch, although I do know subconsciously that her appearances in the season are pretty much non-existent from this point on. But compared to the previous two episodes, I think Chapter 4 does the best job of communicating the lore of the Roanoke colony and the farmhouse and presenting it in a way that is compelling and interesting and entertaining. So this episode actually doesn't feel like it's exposition dumpy at all, and that all just comes down to good writing, because none of this should feel like exposition dumping because this is the meat of the story of this half of the season. So hats off to you, John J. Gray, the writer of this episode. I think this one was particularly well written compared to everything we've gotten thus far. Chapter 5 is directed by Nelson Cragg and written by Akilah Cooper. You might recognize that writer's name as after Roanoke, Akilah Cooper has written some of the best and most successful horror films this decade, with screenwriting credits on Malignant, Megan, The Nun 2, as well as the upcoming Megan sequel. Despite her relatively sudden skyrocket to success, Akilah Cooper's been writing for films and television since 2012, and her magic touch certainly was present here in the work that she did for Roanoke. Aside from writing this episode, she was also a supervising producer, and Chapter 5 is definitely one for the books. The episode begins with a new character, Doris Kearns Goodwin, who is actually a real-life historian who you may have seen in some genuine history documentaries. She calls the Roanoke farmhouse by its official name, which apparently is the Big Shaker Mansion, and she proceeds to dump a whole lot of history on us that just so happens to include a big connection to a previous AHS season. So I'm going to hand it off to Cain once again for another piece of the AHS shared universe puzzle coming together.
In the opening scene of Chapter 5, Doris the historian informs us that the mansion was constructed by a man named Edward Philippe Mott. You may remember that Mott was the surname of Gloria and Dandy in Freak Show. A connection between these two seasons and characters gets confirmed pretty quickly in the episode when Doris says,
"But it was said that madness always ran in the family. The line ended in scandal when the last Mott died in South Florida in 1952.
This is a blatant reference to Dandy Mott and the events of Freak Show, which, spoiler alert, ended with this man-baby going on a murderous rampage before he himself gets got by Bet, Dot, and Desiree.
Thanks again, Cain, and as you saw there in the reenactments, Edward Philippe Mott is played by Evan Peters in his 6th consecutive role in the series. And just like how Wes Bentley is credited as a main cast cast member this season but has barely uttered a word, Evan Peters too is credited as a main in Roanoke, despite taking 5 whole episodes to appear. The first act of this episode details the life and times of Edward Philippe Mott, an antisocial and grossly rich slave owner who retreated to the woods where he could display his precious art collection and be an all-around menace. The episode implies that Edward is a slave owner, but it also notes that for the construction of the Big Shaker Mansion, he enlisted help of servants who were Shakers in North Carolina. Edward is also openly gay and is in a relationship with one of his slaves named Guinness. Edward tells Guinness that he resents the others for how they judge their homosexual relationship, and one night Edward wakes up to find that his beloved art collection has been demolished. Edward gathers his servants and demands that they confess who did this, and one of them claims to have seen a woman matching the description of the butcher doing the deed. Edward does not believe this, and he violently retaliates at the workers and forces them into a cellar with no food and no clothes. This very night happens to be a blood moon, and so Edward himself ends up promptly tortured and sacrificed by the butcher and her colonists. He ends up burnt at the stake, essentially, and the show replicates the aerial shots of previous stake burning scenes that were also utilized in Coven. Edward's lover Guinness escaped that night, but he later ends up imprisoned under assumption that he was behind Edward's death. All the while, he did not say a single word about the slave workers that Edward trapped in the cellar, and so Doris informs us that tragically they all died down there, adding yet another dark layer of history to this land. That wraps up the Edward Mott backstory of this episode, so we then pick back up where we left off with the Millers and Flora, who are trapped upstairs watching as the butcher and her mob taunt them. At this point, everyone's been driven so crazy that they're actually thinking rationally for the first time this season.
It didn't matter if they were alive or dead or what they were, I just knew that we had to get out of there.
They all try to escape, but as they descend the staircase, Flora gets snatched from above by one of the Chens. The ghosts of the Chens are clearly different from the other ghosts in American Horror Story, and to me their movements and design seem like homages to a couple of prominent Japanese horror films like Ring or The Grudge. The resulting scenes, though, with the Chens are undeniably terrifying, and I think it was a great choice to reference international horror genres in this way. But with that said, I definitely needed more of the Chens as characters, and also as these creepy crawly ghosts. After once again getting Flora back against all odds, they retreat to the basement where they meet the ghost of Edward Philippe Mott, who shows them a way out using the tunnels that we previously learned about. Edward dramatically monologues to the Millers as they traverse the tunnels, and the flickering flame of Edward's torch allows for a really simple but effective effect where his face flickers with a super ghostly face every few seconds. To me, it feels like maybe the intention behind this effect was that maybe the quote-unquote real spirit of Edward was haunting the footage of this mockumentary, in universe of course, but who knows. Edward eventually leads them into the woods before vanishing, and it is not long before they are kidnapped by the Polk family. Almost forgot about them, didn't you? We will soon come to find out that the butcher's not the only sadistic killer in these woods, as these Polks are certainly not ones you want to mess with either. Back at the Polks' camp, they have Elias tied to a table with both his arm and his foot amputated. Elias warns Matt,
"Get up before she comes."
He says that
Mama took my leg.
And they all best get out of here before Mama Polk gets back. But unlucky for them, Mama's back already. Mama Polk is of course played by the woman, myth, and legend Frances Conroy in a brief but extremely effective appearance. This is Frances's 5th chronological AHS appearance after appearing in every season to this point, aside from Hotel. Mama Polk throws a fit after the meat she spent all day preparing is no good.
Shit! Rancid!
That said meat, as you might have guessed, is from Elias's severed limbs. One of the Polk sons, by the name of Lot, then grabs a mallet and completely bashes Elias's head in. Now listen, it's probably been 2 or 3 years since I last rewatched Roanoke, but I honestly have no memory of this shot where Elias's head is getting bashed in. I can't show it in its entirety without getting demonetized, but perhaps I blacked it out. It is a very gross and gory prosthetic head that gets completely bashed in for just a brief shot, but it's some Ari Aster shit before Ari Aster was doing that shit, and on top of that, it's just some real top-notch prosthetics work. Emmy-winning, in fact. So all of that to say, I have no idea how I didn't remember this shot existed, but it is perhaps one of the goriest, if not the goriest things they've ever done. I know I threw that around a lot in Cult, but between season 6 and season 7, they were undeniably doing some real dark shit. Mama Polk explains that her family has a deal with the butcher that they made over 200 years prior. The butcher lets them live, and they help her keep the house empty and provide sacrifices when necessary. Meanwhile, Lee is still dealing with an extensive interrogation after Shelby turned her in under suspicion that she might have killed Mason, but Lee stands her ground.
But there was no lie to catch. If you tell the truth, you don't have to remember anything.
When Lee is released, she sees a much older text from Matt delivering the news she's been wanting to hear for weeks. They have Flora. So, unaware of the literal chaos and bloodshed going down in these woods, Lee heads that way. The Polks put their captees in a truck, but then in a struggle between Matt and Lot ends up shooting his brother Cain, the driver. Shelby pushes Lot out of the truck and they all run into the woods instead of, taking control of the truck right then and there. It was open, the engine was on. Instead, they hide in plain sight in the woods where Matt's phone gives them away, and they've now officially fucked up the perfect opportunity to escape. Alluding to Skahawk's infatuation with Matt, Mama Polk says,
"If she didn't want you so bad, I'd bash your skull in right now."
So, Mama Polk bashes Shelby's ankle.
My ankle goes click.
I gave up. I never felt more useless.
You know what, Matt? It's kind of hard to disagree with you there. We briefly get a glimpse of a tender moment between these two murderous mothers, Mama Polk and the butcher.
But all agony pales when placed in measure with the cold death of that child.
The butcher once again takes Flora and prepares to sacrifice her, but at the same time, Lee is brought back to the house in a cop car that quickly abandons her there at the sight of the colonists.
Call for backup.
The butcher's son, Ambrose, is clearly struggling with the murder of yet another innocent child, so he says, "No!" And he carries his mother into the fire with himself. And out of the blue, Edward Mott appears and unties the Millers, but the Piggy Man gets in their way. Lee then runs over the Piggy Man, and being useful for once, Matt carries Shelby into the car. Flora manages to get there all by herself, and bada bing bada boom, Shelby, Matt, Lee, and Flora all get away as the flaming butcher chases after them. Complete and utter chaos.
It was a miracle.
The family then takes shelter in a motel room, and it appears as if they've all survived their Roanoke nightmare once and for all. But now there's just the trauma.
Good stuff.
Although the episode does devolve into complete chaos by the end, what comes before is actually a really solid episode that explores two previously overlooked pieces of this season's lore, Edward Philippe Mott and the Polk family. Both are some of the series' most interesting and evil villains, and the episode portrays their cruelty terrifyingly. The episode is genuinely anxiety-inducing, especially when Matt is behaving like a horror movie character and he doesn't just drive away when the pickup truck was right there. And the episode is also a great tease towards the darker territories that the season is about to explore. Noticeably missing from this episode is my favorite, Skahawk. And when I say noticeably missing, I mean it's really noticeable when she's not in these scenes with the other colonists. Like, why isn't she here? Other than...
I'm doing my record.
I have things to do. I haven't slept. This is not the only job that I'm doing.
Visually speaking, between Edward Mott's flickering ghost face, the intense gore, and the butcher's fiery pursuit at the end, the season is ramping up its visceral imagery, and the reenactment scenes are starting to feel extremely real. This amped up viscerality of the visuals helps the episode serve as a transitional episode, as the season is about to make an extreme shift towards reality. AHS Roanoke's mystery box marketing campaign eased fans into a chaotic season of twists and turns, and the season's most notorious surprise occurs right here in Chapter 6. Given that the last episode saw the Millers, Lee, and Flora somehow all escaping the Roanoke colonists with 5 entire episodes to spare, it might not come as a surprise when I tell you that these characters have actually not stepped foot on the Butcher's land for the last time. But how the show gets these characters back into the Big Shaker Mansion is the defining choice of this season for me, as from this point on, we are no longer watching the docuseries My Roanoke Nightmare, but instead we are watching footage from an intended reality TV follow-up that would see both the real-life characters like the Millers and the Harrises, and their Hollywood reenactment counterparts that portrayed them, reuniting at the farmhouse during the week of a blood moon. The beginning of the episode lets us know that My Roanoke Nightmare was a smash hit, besting even The Walking Dead, something I'm sure AHS wishes it could have done at some point as well. We then meet Sidney Aaron James, the executive producer of My Roanoke Nightmare and its follow-up series, which his camera crew is already capturing footage for as he pitches it to network executives.
Return to Roanoke, 3 days in hell.
As the executives try to wrap their head around the concept, they name drop one of my other favorite shows.
So it's like Big Brother.
Bingo, but with scares.
And before I cover too much of his territory, let me throw it over to EJ Moreno for some more analysis of this season's TV parodies.
Having My Roanoke Nightmare be this documentary-style series where we get the talking heads, we get the reenactments, it allowed Roanoke to feel different. We were telling a story, but it was inspired by true things. It was very different. It was very, again, formatted strange. And then episode 6 comes around where the completely different vibe, a completely different format, things shift, and we get another show called 3 Days in Hell, The Return to Roanoke. With episode 6, we leave the reenactments behind and enter a new format and show. This is more akin to a found footage movie. At times, think of Blair Witch, Paranormal Activity, but once we get a bit more of what the show was supposed to be, you can see elements of reality TV like Big Brother and Real World with a bunch of people staying together with cameras everywhere.
Thanks again, EJ, for all of your insight, and as the episode continues, Sidney assures the skeptic executives that he'll be manufacturing scares for the show, and they won't actually be relying on any paranormal activity.
Reality is what we make of it. You of all people should know that.
The executives then share that, despite its success, not every aspect of My Roanoke Nightmare was well received, and viewers were upset that the murder of Mason remained unsolved, and the person they were led to believe killed him, Lee Harris, remained unpunished. It wasn't all roses for the Millers either, whose lives were completely upended by their overnight fame. Matt and Shelby are now separated, as things grew even more complicated when Shelby had a fling with Dominic Banks, the actor who played her husband on the show.
My husband wasn't talking to me, so I settled for the cheap imitation. Matt hasn't spoken to me since.
Shelby signs on to return to Roanoke in a last-ditch attempt to save her marriage, and she makes Sidney promise he won't cast Dominic. Sidney makes that promise, but behind Shelby's back, he confirms with his assistant Diana that Dominic is already signed on. Production crews prep the mansion with hidden cameras and all sorts of jump scares. Sidney's assistant Diana worries that it's all a bit too gimmicky and not going to feel as authentic as the original show. But Sidney tells her that his true intentions behind producing the sequel is not to replicate the original, but to use it as a method to get to the bottom of whether or not Lee Harris actually killed Mason. Another bit of controversy that has arisen from the airing of My Roanoke Nightmare involves the actress who played the butcher, a woman named Agnes Mary Winstead.
She's the role of a lifetime. And I felt a connection
with her from the very first moment.
During the filming of My Roanoke Nightmare, Agnes took method acting incredibly seriously, and the character of Thomasin White proved difficult for her to shake, which resulted in a public meltdown where Agnes attacked tourists on Hollywood Boulevard with a cleaver, in character as the Butcher.
It was a one-time thing, and
Sidney cruelly tricks Agnes into thinking that she too will be joining the sequel, but ultimately he serves her with a restraining order under suspicion that she left a pig shrine on the set.
I didn't do this.
We only want real people this year.
I'm a real person.
As the crew flees Agnes's apartment, we see that she lives in number 1587, which was the year that the lost colony of Roanoke was established, another Easter egg and detail showing us just how obsessed Agnes became with her character and the show. Monet Musime, the actress who played Lee Harris, is also going through a time, as according to her publicist, she has been secretly in and out of a rehab facility for alcoholism. On set, a crew member beheads himself in a freak accident eerily reminiscent of something that happened to one of Edward Mott's slaves during the construction of the mansion. And it's starting to become clear that all of those special effects were a waste, and the Blood Moon's gonna take care of all of Return to Roanoke's horror. Diana takes the crew member's death incredibly seriously, as she should, and when Sidney doesn't halt production, Diana blows a whole lot of dust in his face on her way out. As she drives off, Diana films her side of the story before she comes across the real spirit of Priscilla, and from behind her, the real pigman pops out and causes her to flip her car. Without Diana, the show goes on, and the cast begins to actually return to Roanoke. First is Audrey Tyndall, the actress who played Shelby, who, shockingly, is British.
I built them.
I made the mistake of looking right into the flame, and then, the rest of the world went up. Oh, that's funny to you.
That's just your accent. It's hilarious. I love listening to it. I can listen to it all day.
Turns out Audrey's got the hots for the Motts, as she and the actor who played Edward fell in love and got married after filming Wrapped.
Suck it, we're hitched! Hey!
His name is Rory, and he's already got 1 foot out the door, as his agent wants him back in LA for a screen test with Brad Pitt. The newlyweds are then jump-scared by Agnes in full butcher costume right before both Monet and Shelby arrive. Shelby accidentally offends Audrey, and Audrey proves that she is even more attuned to reality TV than she is dramatic acting.
You're here.
It's never too late for love.
When is it too late? When your heart ossifies? What do you mean?
I was talking about myself.
Matt and Lee arrive, and it's clear that Matt still wants to keep his distance from Shelby, and Lee immediately snaps at Shelby for the role she played in painting her as a killer.
You destroyed Matt, but that wasn't enough. Thanks to your reckless bullshit, everybody thinks I'm a cold-blooded murderer.
Fiery and pathetic. It's exactly how I played her.
Nailed it.
I completely,
The actor clique makes more fun of Shelby, and they all say they don't actually believe the Millers' ghost stories because they filmed on location for 8 weeks with no signs of any spirits. Matt walks in and emphasizes that they weren't there during a blood moon.
The blood moon is coming. Is that bad?
Well, Tamar, have you ever watched the show?
Chapter 6 then gobsmacks the viewer with a title card revealing that every single participant of Return to Roanoke died under mysterious circumstances except for one. And this reality show quickly devolved into a found footage horror flick. Monet immediately gets to drinking, and when Lee asks her if she wants to talk about it, Monet says,
I'm a drunk because of you murdering bitch. I had to live in your head for months.
But as Lee says, that is how Monet chose to portray her. And last but not least to arrive is Dominic, and his arrival is not received very warmly. Audrey sees the pigman and assumes it is an actor sent by Sidney, so Rory searches upstairs for the assailant, where he instead comes face to face with the real ghosts of the murderous nurses, who jump at the opportunity to complete their special mural.
Are is for Rory.
And after appearing in just 2 episodes this season, Evan Peters is out. When this episode aired back in the day, it honestly blew my mind. I thought the concept of bringing all of these characters back together with all sorts of complications within their dynamic and relationships was ingenious, and I thought the reality TV angle was super engaging as a teenaged audience member, and the reveal in this episode that only one character would be making it out of the season alive is what kept me watching this season from week to week with great anticipation. As an episode, I think Chapter 6 does everything it needs to do. It feels like the season itself has restarted, but the stakes are also already much higher than they were previously, as by the end of the episode, 3 characters are killed off. This episode also solidifies American Horror Story Roanoke as the season of the jump scares. Say what you want about jump scares, I definitely don't love when films rely on similarly executed jump scares for each and every one of their thrilling moments of the runtime, but that's not the case in Roanoke for me, as most of their jump scares feel justified and not solely created in the editing room. Even when I know the jump scares are coming, I still jump a little bit at some of these, especially in this episode, and for the most part, Roanoke is really creative with their jump scares, and that's why they're so effective to me. We are now halfway through this season, and I'm gonna say I'm surprised at how much I am enjoying it. It's definitely not got as much meat to it as some other American Horror Story seasons, but that allows certain characters to shine through, like Lee Harris most notably. Other characters are a little bit more shallow and don't get as much depth as Lee Harris, so that is definitely a negative, but the experimentation with this format change in this episode and the extremely dark territories we're about to go just make this one of the most creative, experimental, and unique seasons of American Horror Story, and because of the time that it came out, it's one that I'm extremely nostalgic for since I was right in the middle of high school, and pretty much everything that came out between the years of 2015 or 2016 are like ingrained in my soul. So definitely a lot of my positive feelings are also nostalgia, so take them with a grain of salt. But like I said, the slow burn of characters like Lee or even Shelby are still really strong in the season, and the atmosphere provided by production design and the design choices for the ghosts really makes me feel immersed in each scene, even in the moments when Sarah Paulson is wailing in British and it's begging my disbelief to be unsuspended. That said, of course, one glaring issue with this season and the show as a whole is the lack of Native American perspective, and particularly in this season it feels like a glaring oversight. But that's not Chapter 6's cross to bear. I just think it will end up being my main negative takeaway from this rewatch. But Chapter 6 is actually one of my all-time favorite AHS episodes, and it's one that I rewatch just for its audacity alone. Chapter 7 begins with the household searching for Rory, but all they find is a pool of blood. Audrey assumes that Sydney's just cleverly written Rory off of the show so that he could go back to LA for his screen test with Brad Pitt, but Matt bleakly assures everyone that Rory's a goner. Right after Rory's death in a nearby production trailer, Agnes kills Sydney and 2 other crew members. She also steals one of their cameras and takes shelter in the farmhouse's cellar, where we watch her switch back and forth between the cold and evil butcher and the actress who feels remorseful over her actions.
He should not have cast me aside so. He deserves to roast for an eternity. The flaming depths, all this blood. She had a baby. Oh, glad. Alice had a baby. They cheated me of my land, robbed me of my dignity. All the vipers wounded the same. They all had to die.
Agnes's monologue lasts 2.5 minutes, and it's just another one of many instances of Kathy Bates completely devouring a villainous role. Dominic tries to woo Shelby, but Shelby makes it clear that she's focused on reconciling with Matt. In a confessional, Dominic confesses that he's intentionally trying to be the villain of this reality show at Sydney's request, and he name drops some real villains of reality TV history: Dave David Puck Rainey, who was the first person to ever be evicted from a season of The Real World, Omarosa, whose reality TV career at the time only consisted of her appearances on The Apprentice, and Real Housewife Aviva Drescher, who had this memorable moment.
The only thing that is artificial or fake about me is this.
Yeah, I did my homework.
Agnes makes her way inside the mansion and continues her dual personality monologue, this time directed at Shelby, before she ends up slicing up Shelby's shoulder with her cleaver. Dominic barges in just in time to disarm Agnes, but she still manages to get away. Dominic, Audrey, and Matt try to nurse Shelby's wounds while Lee announces that the phone lines have been cut. Over the next hour, the cast desperately pleads to the hidden cameras for help as they slowly come to the realization that they are on their own. Lee, Audrey, and Monet leave to try and find Sydney's production trailers, but in the tunnels, the real ghost of Edward Mott makes an appearance. He roars like Godzilla, and Lee shoots him, but of course that does not stop him. Alone for the first time since separating, Shelby apologizes to Matt for ruining their marriage with her affair with Dominic, but Matt says that the two of them were doomed long before Dominic entered the picture.
This place took something from me. I haven't felt human for 2 years, Shelby.
After escaping Edward and the tunnels, Lee, Audrey, and Monet finally find the trailers and the bodies left there by Agnes. Upon seeing Sydney's insides on the outside, Audrey has a hypothesis.
Oh, Jesus, Sydney, I think he's dead.
You think?
Oh, leave me alone.
Lee takes Sydney's car keys and throws them at Audrey.
Find a phone. Oh, my God.
But
the car is completely dead.
And then...
Oh, my God, it's Agnes! Oh, my God!
Lee shoots Agnes, and the team heads back empty-handed to the farmhouse under the light of the full blood moon. Audrey sobs in a desperate video message to Rory, but soon enough, blood starts to drip from above her, where Rory's body has been strung up in the trees. Just then, the Polks find these lost TV stars, and our mourning heroes try their best to get away. But of course, they end up captured by the Polks. Agnes has survived her gunshot wound, and she's retreated back to the cellar where she removes the bullet from her chest with a pair of pliers. Alright, we've now reached the point of no return. Things are about to get insanely dark, just warning you. Matt wakes up in the night as if he's under some sort of trance, and he goes down to the basement where Skahawk is waiting for him. Dominic witnesses this, and being the villain that he is, he wakes up Shelby, who of course is still recovering from the insane amount of blood loss and no proper medical treatment, but Dominic takes her down to the basement where Matt is once again entangled with the ancient witch. Shelby fends Skahawk off with a crowbar, but Matt professes,
I'm in love with her, Shelby. She's the reason I came back.
Shelby then gets sent into a blind rage where she repeatedly bashes Matt's head with the crowbar to no end. At the Polks grounds, Lee is being kept separate from Audrey and Monet, and the Polks begin to slice pieces of Lee's leg off in a truly agonizing scene to watch. And later, Audrey and Monet are also cruelly tortured by the Polks. Meanwhile, Shelby is at complete rock bottom, and Dominic tries to calm her down. This episode, between Adina Porter's performance as Lee, Kathy Bates as Agnes, and Lily Rabe's performance as Shelby, the episode is truly on fire with intense and guttural emotional performances, and particularly in this scene with Shelby, it's one that just sits with you for a while after you watch it. Agnes parades as the butcher once more before she is faced with the presence of the real butcher and her colonists. Agnes kneels before the butcher and says,
I just wanted to be on TV.
Before the butcher swings her deadly cleaver directly into Agnes. This episode is a tough one to get through, and paired with the two episodes that come next, we are now entering some of the darkest territory of the franchise, and because we are so locked in with these characters and living with them in almost real time, it feels even more intense than when similar things have happened in previous seasons, because especially with actresses like Lily Rabe and Adina Porter and Angela Bassett that can really sell the guttural emotions that these scenes are requiring from them. Shelby's descent in this episode is so hard to watch because it is performed with so much realism by Lily Rabe, and when you pair her guttural performance with the brutal images that this episode throws at you, you're definitely going to need to watch Sesame Street or something after you watch this episode to cleanse your palate. With the previous episode's promise that only one character will survive this return to Roanoke, this episode delivers that harsh reality as some of our favorite characters start to get taken out. This episode is hopeless, it's gut-wrenching, and it is brought to life by kinetic performances by Kathy Bates, Adina Porter, and Lily Rabe, who did not come to play this season. Do you hear that? Excuse me, I gotta go glue down my powdered wig and address this mob outside.
This land will always be mine, and I shall consecrate my holy right to it with thy blood.
Picking up right where Chapter 7 left off, Chapter 8 begins with Shelby and Dominic trying to escape through the tunnels, but it is there that they are met by the real ghosts of the Chen family. We then catch back up with Lee, who is still being held captive by the Polks, as are Shelby and Monet. We get a better look at Jethro Polk, who, believe it or not, is played by Finn Wittrock underneath all of these prosthetics. Roanoke was Finn Wittrock's third AHS season out of his 5 total appearances. The real Mama Polk, by the way, is played by an also unrecognizable Robin Weigert, in her second of 3 AHS roles, coming after a brief appearance in Asylum and coming before her appearance in Double Feature. Both Finn and Robin completely disappear into these roles to the point where when I watched this for the first time, I did not recognize them at all. Mama and Jethro tell Lee the family's history of cannibalism, marijuana harvesting, and incest before taking more pieces of Lee's leg and also removing her ear. Jethro complains to Lee about how his brothers got to be depicted on My Roanoke Nightmare, but not him. So Lee promises that if he helps free her, she will get him on TV. Jethro then tells Lee about the only truly famous member of the Polk family, Kincaid Polk, who is the one who mimicked the ghost of the Piggy Man and went on a killing spree at the 1893 World's Fair in Chicago. As Cain mentioned earlier in the video, this is the moment that connects the spirit of the Piggy Man that haunts the grounds of Roanoke to the urban legend of the Piggy Man that haunts Eric Stonestreet's character in Murder House. The middleman between the two being this long deceased member of the Polk family, Kincaid Polk.
Kincaid Polk. He used to take the hogs to slaughter in Chicago. Then came the World's Fair. That's when the Piggy Man was born. After slaughtering hogs, he put on a pig mask and slaughtered people.
You got the idea from the others. You saw what the butcher did.
Jethro refuses to free Lee, and he offers her some of his, white powdery stuff. Understanding that she's probably not making it out of this alive, Lee accepts his offer and ends her sobriety. Afterwards, she convinces Jethro to let her film a message for Flora, where she confesses once and for all,
I killed Daddy. That's on me, and me alone.
Lee then seduces Jethro, and this convinces him to untie her restraints, and the second that he does this, she puts him in a headlock that knocks him out, allowing her to flee on her injured leg, but she leaves the confession tape behind. Back in the tunnels with the Chens, they break Dominic's hand, and him and Shelby are then met by a whole gaggle of ghosts, including the Chens, the Piggy Man, the nurses, and the butcher. And one of the Chens then drops a chandelier on Shelby's ankle.
My ankle goes
And with nowhere else to run, Dominic carries Shelby back upstairs, where she decides to take her own life. As horrific as this scene is, this is another parallel to Season 1's Murder House, where Lily Rabe herself played the character of Nora Montgomery, who similarly took her own life after killing her husband. Back with Audrey and Monet, the Polks have trouble differentiating these actors from their real characters, and they're very curious about the teeth that rained from the sky.
You think it actually rains teeth here?
Well, it's a gift from the others. All them that's been sacrificed over the years, we think it's those ones.
And then in another excruciating scene, Lot Polk tries to pull Monet's teeth, but her chair breaks and she manages to overpower Ishmael Polk. Monet hears the voice of Mama Polk and flees before she can untie Audrey. Then Mama Polk successfully pulls one of Audrey's teeth. This dentist appointment is interrupted by Lee, who knocks out Mama and frees Audrey, and then Audrey bashes Mama's head in with a mallet. This season sure has a lot of head smashing, doesn't it? Speaking of that, Audrey and Lee make it back to the house where they find Matt's nearly unrecognizable body. Looking for medicine, they find Shelby's body, and Audrey says,
Oh my god, poor Shelby! I feel like part of me has died with her, oh my god!
Dominic tells Lee and Audrey what happened with Matt and Shelby, but they do not believe him, and they kick him out of the master bedroom. In the hallway, the piggy man then kills Dominic. Meanwhile, Audrey sends a hopeless message to her fans.
I just want you all to know I had so many wonderful performances waiting for you.
When the sun rises, Lee is determined to return to the Polk farm to retrieve the videotape that has her confession to killing Mason on it, but she tells Audrey that she wants it because it has footage of the both of them killing members of the Polk family, and in the wrong hands, it could paint them both as cold-blooded killers. Despite Audrey understanding that they killed the Polks out of self-defense, Lee's strong will and need of walking assistance convinces her to go along with Lee's truly horrible and completely avoidable plan. When they open the front door, they are met by a piggy man, but when he gets a bonk on the head, he unmasks himself as none other than Dylan Conrad, the man who played Ambrose White on My Roanoke Nightmare.
Dylan?
First off, the second half of Roanoke functions differently than any other season of American Horror Story because we are, for the most part, experiencing these events in one place with the same group of characters in relatively real time. So naturally, these episodes are not packed full of lore or backstory like the first 5 episodes were. With that said, this format and pacing is very akin to the pacing of similar found footage films, and it is in these moments of realism where the true horror lies. In this episode, it's the desperate attempts at escape from the characters being held captive by the Polks. And of course, the continuation of Lily Rabe's masterful portrayal of a Shelby who has truly lost everything. Chapter 8 hangs out in that dark shadow that Chapter 7 cast, instead of moving the story too much further past that point. Like I said in the last review, Lee wanting the video camera, for instance, is a character choice that seemed to have only been made to pad the runtime of the season, because logically, Lee would have grabbed that camera the second she knocked out Jether, and even if she didn't do it then, it definitely would have crossed her mind by the time she left the Polks in Chapter 7. But no, it took her until the next day to decide that she needed to go back for the camera, and then the episode leaves us with that whole camera thing unresolved. Generally speaking, most of the character choices in this season do make sense, so when Lee suddenly doesn't give a damn about the world potentially knowing about the fact that she killed Mason, it's not going to come off as natural, and then when she magically comes to her senses by the end of the episode just in time to set up the plot for the next episode, it just leaves me feeling like we could have maybe come up with a more creative final quest for these characters to go on in the next episode. Chapter 9 just so happened to air on November 9th, 2016, which is a pretty important date to the following season, Cult, but the episode itself has nothing to do with that, of course. And it begins with a bit of a change in perspective. We are now following the cameras of 3 superfans of My Roanoke Nightmare, Sophie, Todd, and Milo, who are venturing through the woods in North Carolina in search of the mansion from their favorite TV show. Sophie gives a take on My Roanoke Nightmare that I would call generous.
On the surface, it's an interracial story set in a post-racial world, which, of course, is a lie. But they're really talking about the colonization of America, the Butcher and the Roanoke colony, which became a matriarchy in a patriarchal system. That's why it's so timely. It's a battle we're fighting today.
When they start to locate some familiar locations from the show, they feel confident that they're on the right track. But it is the wandering ghost of Diana, Sydney's assistant, that leads them off track towards the site of her dead body. As you've probably noticed, Sophie the superfan is played by Thaisa Farmiga in her 3rd AHS role, which was, at the time, her first since Coven. Meanwhile, we catch back up with Audrey, Lee, and Dylan, who says that he's been waiting in a motel until the day he was scheduled to make his arrival on Return to Roanoke, dressed as the Piggy Man. Lee and Audrey show him all of the supernatural bloodshed that is very real, and Lee tells him that Monet is still unaccounted for somewhere near the Polk farm. But of course, what Lee really wants from the Polks is their camera with her recorded confession. We then get some good old-fashioned filler as those vlogging Roanoke fans get interrogated by the police, but truly none of this matters. The police do not believe their stories, / they clearly know about the Polks and the ghosts and everything. They've been covering this up for years, but we knew all this. It does not give us any new information. Clocking in at 34 minutes, this episode was also the shortest episode in AHS history at that point in time, so the fact that any of its runtime is devoted to these vlogger characters that we don't give two shits about is a sign that this found footage half of the season truly did not have enough meat to withstand more than 3 episodes. When you also consider that the other main storyline in this episode is completely manufactured as well, with Lee, Audrey, and Dylan retrieving a camcorder from the Polks that they could have easily retrieved at 2 previous points in the last episode. Monet also gets recaptured by the Polks in between last episode and this episode, which is something that story-wise did not need to happen because she herself escaped the Polks in the last episode. To put it simply, they very easily could have just made Roanoke a 9-episode season and taken out Chapter 9, and I wouldn't be too mad about it. But at the Polks' house, Audrey finds Monet, who, like I said, was recaptured by the Polks shortly after she escaped. Meanwhile, Lee finds the camcorder and Dylan successfully jumpstarts one of the Polks' trucks before getting stabbed by Lot. And under the sudden glow of the blood moon, Lee falls under a trance and drops her precious camcorder before limping into the woods. Audrey shoots Ishmael Polk, grabs the camcorder, and both her and Monet leave Dylan for dead. Cameras in the forest capture Skahawk killing a boar and feeding its heart to Lee, just like she did to the butcher centuries ago. Meanwhile, those dumb vloggers have returned to the woods in the middle of the night.
We're trending on Twitter. Hashtag Blood Moon.
They then come across Lee Harris, who is clearly now under control by Skahawk, and she kills Todd the vlogger, which causes his pals to run off in terror. They take shelter in the production trailer, where they watch from the monitors as Lee enters the mansion, and the superfans decide that they will go to the house to try and save Audrey and Monet. Audrey and Monet then confront a possessed Lee, who pushes Monet off of the ledge of the spiral staircase down to the wreckage of the chandelier, which impales her and you would think kills her, but unfortunately it does not immediately kill her, as you can tell in the background of some of these shots. Audrey gets some good slices and jabs at possessed Lee before she runs out of the front door and begins to climb down the cellar. But possessed Lee is not too far behind her, and she lodges the butcher's cleaver into Audrey's shoulder before pushing her down the cellar, where the editors made sure to use a particularly painful sound effect for her head hitting a pipe on the way down. The vloggers then watch as Dylan is killed before they too are brutally killed by the butcher and her colonists, now with the assistance of possessed Lee. The show then cuts to body cam footage of the crime scene the next morning, where authorities find an inconsolable Lee Harris who is just screaming in absolute horror. And somehow Audrey survived the... And at the sight of Lee, she grabs one of the cop's guns, and another cop fires several shots at Audrey, which officially confirms Lee Harris as the prophetic sole survivor of Return to Roanoke. Alright, I hate to be a Debbie Downer, but I am not the biggest fan of Chapter 9. As much as I love Taissa Farmiga's other AHS roles, this one's completely shallow and not even in a comedic relief kind of way. In my opinion, this entire episode could have been cut, and we could have just added Lee being possessed by Skahawk and killing the remaining cast members on to the already short Chapter 8. You definitely could have added that to the previous episode without having to add more than 10 minutes to the runtime, and striking an entire episode from this 10-episode season would have prevented them from padding the season with unnecessary characters and side quests, especially in this episode. Chapter 9 slows the season down and leaves a bad taste in my mouth after a extremely strong and experimental stretch of episodes, chapters 6, 7, and 8. But now there is just one episode left of the season, So you know what that means. It's time for another controversial finale from Ryan Murphy, which are always a joy to unpack. The final chapter of AHS Roanoke throws audiences into yet another change in format, as now both My Roanoke Nightmare and Return to Roanoke have concluded with only Lee Harris and her daughter Flora still alive. Sticking with the television theme, though, the finale tells its story through the lens of 3 different fictional TV shows, in addition to some footage from fan events and the Polk family. The episode starts with a flashback to a fan Q&A panel that occurred shortly after the airing of My Roanoke Nightmare. The panel is hosted by Trixie Mattel and Edward Hansen, who had previously hosted a YouTube after show for AHS Hotel just 1 year prior to this extra meta appearance in Roanoke. This also doubles as another reality TV reference, since Trixie's first season of Drag Race had just aired in the year prior as well.
Thought I looked a little soft in the challenge. Did anybody else notice?
Next week, it's gonna be the same damn look.
Well, maybe mine will fit the challenge, girl.
I thought maybe you was going to a birthday party. You just got confused and went to the damn airport.
I went to your mom's birthday party.
The panel unites 13 of the cast members from My Roanoke Nightmare. The fan questions highlight Agnes's passion for her role as the butcher, as well as the fans' obsession with Rory, and one fan's emotional connection with Lee Harris.
My name is Bristol Windows. I totally identify with Lee, who I feel has had some really nasty and unfair things said about her online.
The show then cuts to this very fan's YouTube channel, where she reveals that Return to Roanoke did make it to air despite its graphically horrific nature, and the sequel season was even more of a cultural phenomenon than the first. However, whether or not the supernatural elements of the show or the deaths that occurred on the show were real seems to be unclear in the cultural zeitgeist. But this particular fan believes that the deaths were real, and that is why she is not one of Return to Roanoke's supporters.
I thought the second series was just really exploitative, turning what was a real artistic achievement into something quite crass.
This fan also reveals that the Return to Roanoke series resulted in Lee Harris being put on trial for the murders of some of her co-stars in Return to Roanoke during the time when she was possessed by Skahawk. The show then cuts to a YouTube video posted by Lot Polk, who is sending death threats to Lee Harris. We are then shown our first of the 3 TV shows in this finale. This one's called Cracked, and it's reminiscent of true crime shows like Snapped or Dateline. This episode of Cracked is all about the story of Lee Harris, and it is filled with a bunch of poorly photoshopped photos of her and Mason. The show features interviews with the district attorney, who claims he knew without a shadow of a doubt that Lee Harris killed Mason from the beginning, even though he admits that the security footage was just circumstantial evidence. Given what we know about this police department, it's clear that this guy is corrupt and would much rather pin this murder on Lee than shed light on the department's ties to the Polk family and all the other mysterious deaths that have been covered up over the years that are ultimately linked to the Ghost Colony and the Polks. The show also interviews some of the jury members who reveal that they were swayed by the disturbing footage of Lee's torture at the hands of the Polks, as well as the hallucinogenic properties in the Polks' marijuana, to rule Lee as not guilty. So the DA puts Lee on trial again for the murder of Mason, given the airing of her confession from the camcorder. Footage from this trial reveals that while Flora was in the woods with Priscilla, she witnessed the confrontation between Lee and Mason that resulted in Lee hitting him over the head with a rock and killing him.
You killed Daddy.
Lee then whispers something to her lawyer, who then pries Flora about her experiences with the ghost of Priscilla. The lawyer spins this as just another one of Flora's imaginary fantasies, given that the TV show already put this idea in her head that Lee killed Mason when they aired that confession tape. After 16 days of deliberation, the jury rules Lee Harris not guilty yet again.
But I couldn't send a woman to jail based on ghost stories.
Afterwards, Flora refuses to speak with Lee.
But nobody won here.
We then switch channels to another TV show, a very special edition of the Lana Winters Hour, where Lana Winters herself from AHS Asylum has come out of retirement to interview Lee Harris. To unpack this final connection that Roanoke makes to another AHS season, I'm handing it off to Cain one last time.
In an almost out-of-the-blue random connection with Asylum, Sarah Paulson reprises her role as an aged-up Lana Winters, who we now learn is retired after a long and successful career in television. However, the harrowing tale of Lee Harris is enough to bring Lana out of retirement for a special. And during the pair's interview, we learn that, similar to Lana, Lee has published a book based on her own personal experiences. Lee hopes to relate to Lana since Lana had to kill her own son, but Lana highlights the differences between their situations, and that Lee allegedly killed Mason only so that she could have full custody of Flora, not to save either of their lives like Lana did by killing her own son.
After a few tough questions, Lana Winters reveals the true reason behind this interview. Flora Harris has gone missing and authorities believe that Lee is hiding her. Lee is shocked to hear this, but the dramatics are interrupted by even more drama as Lot Polk has barged in with an assault rifle. Lot kills many people outside before knocking out Lana Winters. However, he is taken out by police officers before he can do what he came there to do, kill Lee. Later, a news report reveals that Lana survived this attack.
Looks like you're home from the hospital, resting comfortably.
Yes, indeed.
We then cut to the last TV parody of Roanoke, a show called Spirit Chasers, which is clearly playing off of the hundreds of ghost hunting shows out there, like Ghost Hunters, Ghost Chasers, Ghost Stalkers, and so on.
I haven't been this freaked out since we were in that asylum.
The co-host of Spirit Chasers is played by James Morosini, who would also appear with a larger role in the following season, Colt, and the team is joined by Ashley Gilbert, the actor who played Cricket in My Roanoke Nightmare. They note that it's currently a blood moon cycle, so things may get a little hairy.
Y'all ready to catch some ghosts?
On their tour of the house, they end up finding Lee Harris, who is here on the search for Flora, which she says she's been doing for 2 weeks now. She warns the Spirit Chasers,
You stupid f***s. You deserve to die. And if you had any brains at all, you would get out of here now. Because this house has a strange way of ripping that frat boy smile right off your face.
Are you kidding? Chasers don't run?
And when the Piggy Man shows up, Ashley proves that he didn't watch the show Tamar and tries shouting Croatoan even though it's currently the peak of a blood moon, and thus the Piggy Man kills Ashley. One of the Chens grabs a Spirit Chaser and the other two book it out of the front door, where they get butchered by the Butcher and company. As you just witnessed, Roanoke's finale tackles even more TV parodies, so let me pass it off to EJ one last time to break down those 3 fake TV shows.
A lot happens in this chunk of Roanoke, and I was really impressed that they were able to keep things fresh after they did this, episode 6 reveal, and we got a whole new show. We also last a couple days within this show, and I'm like, oh, where else can they go from here? How else do you homage television? Well, the finale gives us 3 wild little miniseries within this big series. God, Roanoke is a headache at times. Yes, the finale introduces us to Cracked. This is one of the new shows for Roanoke, and this is another reenactment style show, but a bit more focused on the legal side. Cracked, at times, feels a lot closer to what Ryan Murphy would do with The People vs. OJ, and the newest season of Monsters with the Menendez brothers. After everything she went through, Lee Harris needs to tell her story. She is obviously on trial. We see all of that in Cracked, but Lee gets to sit down with a very familiar face and tell her side of the story, and also we have events that are crazy, and Lana Winters gets to return and be a badass. That's all we want. Next up in the finale is the Lana Winters special, which really isn't inspired by a movie, but this is more of a traditional sit-down interview. Think of Diane Sawyer and Whitney Houston, or anything with Barbara Walters.
His silly rabbit.
His what?
His silly rabbit.
His silly rabbit?
Yes.
Is that what he calls you?
No.
It's definitely a strange choice to have the Lana Winters special here, but it does tie it into other seasons. We get another great Sarah Paulson turn and a bit of fan service. This all leads us to the final segment in the finale, which leads us to the crazy end of this season. Yes, we meet some very strange and boring and soon-to-be-dead paranormal investigators. Lastly, we have Spirit Chasers, which takes us to the final part of the big finale. Here, a group of dummies filming a paranormal investigation show by breaking into the Roanoke house meets their end. They meet Lee, she tells them to get out, and basically we all go through the madness that is living in Roanoke. This is totally like those ghost hunters, ghost adventure shows we see on TV, where it's just a bunch of people trying to get spooky stuff to happen when it's not really there. You see them. Actually, funny enough, the people who do, I think, Ghost Adventures did that Demon House movie that I mentioned earlier, which feels like a weird homage. Like, you see how inspired Roanoke is and how much other things feel inspired by what this set up. I love found footage movies. I love documentaries, mockumentaries, and I thought Roanoke was really smart for putting all of these together. It was different. It was new. If you love TV, you understood all these references. You know, My Roanoke Nightmare is that cheesy reenactment show. You know the Big Brother reality show where we get the actors and the real people together. That's interesting and new. And then we get 3 very special but mini little series within the finale that really tie all together. This odd love letter to TV. Yes, Roanoke is a cult horror, folksy, weird story, but it's also a love letter to every bit of weird television, all this sensationalized, all this drama, all this crazy stuff that we love to watch and consume on TV. Roanoke gave it to us. It's smart, it's fresh. Roanoke, I have some problems with you, but this TV stuff, not so bad. Not so bad.
Inside, Flora finally shows herself to Lee, and for the first time all season, the show is no longer parodying any other TV shows. The entirety of the rest of the episode is filmed and edited like a normal narrative show, or more or less like American Horror Story. It is in this moment that Lee is honest with her daughter, face to face. She confirms what Flora said she saw on trial. Lee killed Mason with a rock because he was going to fight for full custody of Flora.
I saw you. He was gonna take you away from me. A girl needs her mother. Your daddy never understood that.
There's a lot of gray area when it comes to the character of Lee Harris, because the show never shows us a reliable version of the confrontation she had with Mason, but Lee's own words here reveal that she was truly acting selfishly in that moment. Even though the show portrays Mason to be violent towards Lee on 2 separate occasions, Lee is not telling Flora that she killed him out of self-defense. She's telling her that she killed him so that he wouldn't take Flora away from her. So this choice was most definitely influenced by the intense guilt that Lee still felt after her first daughter, Emily, disappeared while Lee wasn't looking in a grocery store parking lot. Lee tells Flora that she just wants to be a mother to her and to have that picture-perfect version of their family. But Flora says that Priscilla needs her, and Flora wants to become like Priscilla, meaning a ghost, so that she can help protect Priscilla from the butcher. Lee struggles to accept her only hope slipping away from her before she proposes that she be the one to stay here, become a ghost, and protect Priscilla.
I fought off the butcher twice. I could do a much better job at protecting her.
Lee says that Flora can be raised by her grandparents, and Lee will instead become a mother to Priscilla.
What do you think?
Shortly after, smoke begins to billow out of the house as Flora walks to safety, accepting Lee's offer, before a gas explosion is ignited by a bullet shot into Lee by Priscilla, and the Big Shaker mansion fully goes up in flames. As Flora is driven back to civilization, Lee holds Priscilla's hand as the ghost colonists surround the property. First off, I want to talk a little bit more about why I love the story of Lee Harris in Roanoke. A bullet to her shoulder gave her an addiction problem that caused her to start neglecting her daughter, but once she hit that rock bottom and saw the consequences of her actions, she stayed sober until she truly believed she was about to die at the Polk farm. Her desperate need to cling on to Flora most definitely stems from the disappearance of her first daughter.
And I just had to run to the grocery store and grab some sauce real fast. 5 minutes. I don't know why I didn't take her in with me. When I came back to the car, she was gone. I never saw her again.
but of course the show illustrates how that desperation is sometimes selfish and counterintuitive. In an attempt to keep custody of Flora, Flora's father ends up dead, which results in Flora resenting Lee. And during the trial, Lee sits idly by as her lawyer paints Flora as a liar so that Lee won't be put away and never see her daughter again. While this clears Lee of any charges, it damages her relationship with her daughter even further than it already was. By the end of Roanoke, Lee finally realizes that she can no longer have what she wanted in life because of those choices. So she gives up that selfish desire to cling on to Flora, and she makes a choice that will actually benefit her daughter. And she rescues Flora from a life of mistrust and fear, whether that life was going to be with Lee back in civilization or with Priscilla and the ghosts. Flora gets the happiest ending possible, a fresh start being raised by her grandparents, knowing the full truth of what happened in Roanoke, and Lee lets go of her selfish desire to be the one to protect Flora, which is what ends up saving Flora's life in the end. And Lee, too, gets a happy ending of sorts, as she has committed a selfless action out of love for her daughter, and she also gets to be a mother to Priscilla. Lee's story is messy, it's complicated, but it ultimately feels raw and realistic. This is a person whose entire life was put off course by a random occurrence that set off a series of adversities that nobody could come out of unscathed. But even in the end, she does not give up, and she is ultimately successful in protecting Flora once she acknowledges that she cannot be the one to protect her. But talking more specifically about this finale episode, it gets a lot of hate within the fandom. Shoehorning in 3 more TV parodies right at the end of the season definitely feels like another instance of the show padding the runtime, but the filler in this episode is much more entertaining than that of the previous episode, and by the end of the episode we do get a resolution and we do get some solid character moments. However, the Lana Winters stuff is definitely gratuitous, especially coming 1 year after the Billie Dean Howard appearance in the hotel finale. But despite those 3 parodies, they are all connected, and they tell the story of what happened to Lee and Flora after the conclusion of Return to Roanoke, and I think for the most part it's an effective episode that is fully brought home with that final scene between Lee and Flora in the Big Shaker mansion. I'm not gonna lie, I actually really like this finale episode. It wraps up pretty much all of the season's loose ends, even if it means killing off almost all of the characters, and it does give relatively happy endings to the 2 surviving characters who were this close to being yet another one of the Roanoke colony's victims. American Horror Story Roanoke was received positively by critics at the time, who praised the season's smaller scale and commitment to its various formats, but fans were a little bit more mixed on the season at the time. Nowadays though, at least according to my most recent audience poll, Roanoke sits right around the middle, as you guys ranked it as your 7th favorite season overall. One person who wasn't very hot about AHS Roanoke was one of its stars, Sarah Paulson, who revealed 5 years after the fact on a podcast that she wanted out of this season.
I just don't care about this season at all. I know people will get mad at me for saying it, but to me this was post having played Marcia, and it's what I went to do right after finishing Marcia, and I was so underwhelmed by the whole experience because I felt like I had entered into a new place inside of myself in terms of what I thought possible, in terms of what I might be willing to see if I could do. And I felt really kind of trapped by my responsibility and my contractual obligation to do American Horror Story. As much as it's my home and I've loved it always, it was the first time I felt like I wish I could have gone to Ryan and said, please let me sit this one out. Yeah, let me out.
This clip immediately circulated amongst various fan pages and became sort of an inside joke amongst the AHS community, and apparently Ryan Murphy didn't take it to heart, since Sarah's comments about Roanoke were even referenced in the extremely meta episode of American Horror Stories entitled Game Over.
You know, we could always go to Norm's, get some pancakes, go home, binge watch Roanoke.
Why does Sarah Paulson should talk that season? It's so good.
Do you really want to go watch Roanoke?
No, I want to shit myself because I'm so scared.
But speaking some more on how future iterations of AHS have connected to Roanoke, there's honestly not that much. The urban legend version of the Piggy Man also appears in that very episode of American Horror Stories, and he also appears in the other Murder House-centric episode of the spin-off, and other than a one-off reference to a blood moon cycle in Apocalypse,
in 2 weeks' time, at
The rise of the blood moon, you will take the test of the 7 wonders.
The series hasn't really touched Roanoke ever since, but given the in-universe cultural implications that this season has, as well as its pretty open ending, just like I felt with Colt, I'm gonna again say that I would be open to seeing a future season that connects with Roanoke, or even a sequel season, as long as it connects in a meaningful way and is a fully thought out story. Roanoke is one of American Horror Story's most experimental seasons, and from a story perspective, I personally really love how the season slowly builds into becoming a character study of Lee Harris. And aesthetically speaking, the production design, costume design, makeup, and cinematography throughout the season create one of the series' most immersive atmospheres, with so much attention to detail. It's that commitment to those creative choices and the ballsy decisions like changing formats so many times and announcing that only one of the main characters would make it out of the season alive that make me love this season so much, and it's what makes it such an anomaly in the lineup of all the AHS seasons. The season also has moments of extreme horror, particularly in chapters 7 and 8, that amongst fans gives the season a reputation of being one of the show's scariest, and I definitely sign off on that opinion. As we talked about throughout the video, there were of course some missed opportunities to flesh out the story with further explorations of nearby Native American tribes at the time of the Roanoke colony's disappearance, like the Croatan/Croatoan tribe, rather than creating a story that erases them completely. That right there is definitely going to be my biggest critique coming out of this rewatch, and it is actually baffling to me that this...
It is actually a word of dark power and blood magic.
Never gets challenged with any alternate perspectives throughout the season. The episodes have succinct runtimes that sometimes work in its favor, but other times it does feel like the writers were occasionally grasping at straws to fill episodes. The most blatant example of that is the vlogger storyline. I think the runtime devoted to those filler aspects of the season could have been better utilized exploring different historical angles of, frankly, the late 16th century in America, or also to give more depth to some of the season's more shallow characters like Matt or Monet. Overall, Roanoke is a quick season that you can binge in a weekend, but it's one that's going to put you on a true roller coaster of emotions. It boasts incredible performances by Adina Porter, Lily Rabe, Angela Bassett, and Kathy Bates, and they all truly elevate this season's material to soaring heights. And despite its chaotic and ever-changing format, the season still tells a complete story in regards to the character of Lee Harris, which I can't say for too many other AHS seasons. If you want to hear me break down more seasons of American Horror Story, well, lucky for you, I've got some more on the horizon, and in case you missed them, I've already done extensive deep dives on American Horror Story Cult and the 2 seasons of Scream Queens, which isn't American Horror Story, but it has a lot of its DNA. So definitely check out those deep dives if you haven't already while you wait for the next one. Thank you so much to Cain Varner, EJ Moreno, and Mary Girl Moody. I am so grateful that you guys could all make this work. Definitely go check out all of their channels if you're not already subscribed. Each of them have lots of AHS content that I'm sure you guys will love alongside other shows and other content. Definitely head over to their channels and send them some love. Let me know your thoughts on Roanoke in the comments below. Was I too hard on it? Was I not hard enough on it? It's definitely one of the series' most polarizing seasons, so I'd love to hear any and all of your opinions on it. And with that, thank you for watching, fuck the bullshit, and I will see you next time.